A very warm welcome. You're watching One India English with me, Anuputi Gaur, and this is our special show, Global Chit-chat. And today we will discuss and analyze the Iran nuclear deal, the new developments that are taking place. And we're joined by our foreign policy expert, Mr. Tirthaveer Singh Maini. Thanks a lot for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
So, sir, at this point of time, we see that the Biden administration seeks to revive the Iran nuclear deal 2015 that was abandoned by the former US President Donald Trump. So why do you think it is important for United States to revive this deal? And what do you make of the recent statements that have been made by United States?
Okay, so I think last week, in fact, the last couple of weeks, we've been discussing this issue, and there was, as I said, basically there has been criticism of the Biden administration for being risk averse, or essentially even a lot of people feel, especially the Democrats, that he hasn't really deviated from the Trump administration's approach towards Iran. Now, that is not true. As I said earlier, also that the Biden administration has never really ruled out diplomacy. It has been open, but of course, there have been the main issue has been the Biden administration also is clear that only when Iran returns to full compliance to the JCPOA, only then will the US remove the sanctions. So, this has been a sticking point. Now, till date, I mean, this is the stand of both sides. Iran is saying that you remove the sanctions and we'll get back to full compliance. Now, but probably, if you look at it, it is essential. I mean, the pressure on the Biden administration has also been more because a lot of people feel the time is of essence. As we had said, there are elections in June. The hardliners have got emboldened in Iran. So a lot of people in the US actually feel that the focus should have been on strengthening the moderates. But obviously, there are within the Democrats itself there is a divide. There are those who are a bit more hawkish on Iran. There are those who believe that even if the US has to sort of take a risk or take a gamble and go out of the way, there's something wrong as such. Now the point is that the last week has been witness to some interesting developments. The first is obviously the virtual meeting between Iran and other signatories to the deal. And here I might mention that obviously the E3 countries, that's UK, Germany, and France, they have been very important players. Behind the scenes, the US has also been talking to them and saying that what are basically that reach out to Iran, find out a way through which we can get back, or we can find a middle ground, and at least this impasse can be sort of broken to some extent. So obviously the E3 countries have been playing a very important role. And then, so Friday you had a virtual meeting. Now there is going to be an in-person meeting. In fact, after this whole the coronavirus, I think it's the first time that you have people. It's not a virtual meeting, but people are actually in Vienna. So now you have to be realistic because Iran has clearly spelled out that it's not going to budge from its stand. The US has also welcomed this meeting, and obviously behind the scenes they have been encouraging this sort of engagement. But they have also said that the expectations should be realistic. But so the main point is the timing that that at a time when the probably this the narrative the geopolitical narrative has been focused on the US on the China-Iran 25-year agreement. So the timing of this engagement is also important.
Yeah. So talking about that, for the first time in such a long time, we see finally an indirect engagement, a dialogue is happening between United States and Iran that the EU countries are responsible for, which is happening in Vienna and Austria. So basically, what do you think is the real significance of this indirect talk for United States, for Iran, and also the other EU countries?
Okay, so first is obviously symbolic. Till now it was, I mean, if you look at the last couple of years, if you look at the Trump administration after 2018, people had given up on this, right? So that's the first thing. Secondly, obviously, it shows some sort of urgency And thirdly, if you look at it, I mean, it's not just the E3, you have even Russia and China also as part of it. So I think there are various layers to it. One is obviously in the context of US and Iran relations. So if something can be worked, it's really good for bilateral relations. The second is, I think, an important point. I mean, basically, it just shows the difference from the Trump administration, that how seriously, at least, so far, the Biden administration has taken its relationship with allies, which are specifically, I mean, the E3 countries. So, and keeping the doors open. So, as I said, I mean, symbolically, both sides have. So, Iran has actually, the Iranian foreign minister said there's no point of Iran-US talks as yet. US has also done the posturing that don't expect too much. But certain things in diplomacy you have to read between the lines. So this meeting in person, what has been happening in the last 2 months behind the scenes, how the US has been engaging with E3 countries and all. Obviously, this has laid the groundwork, and you don't want to get into a situation where there's a focus more on optics. So suppose you have a meeting between US and Iran, and suddenly there is no the groundwork, the homework is not there. There's no proper groundwork for the same. That would be a problematic situation. So I think one of the clear differences between this administration's approach and the Trump administration's approach, not just, I mean, Iran is one example. It clearly shows that there is a lesser emphasis on just, personal chemistry or optics. And you actually have, a team. There's a stronger emphasis on a team effort, and you're following the conventional route towards diplomacy. So there are some other, beyond the bilaterals, also there are important takeaways from, and this gives some insights into how maybe the Biden administration will look at other complex issues as well.
Also, sir, if you look at how do other countries in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, that are not on good terms with Iran, are going to see this particular indirect talk between US and Iran?
Very good question. So basically, obviously, Saudi Arabia and some other GCC countries had also said that if the US is to get back on the JCPOA, you have to consult us, you have to bring us on board. Israel had also said that last time. One of the reasons why they said that this was not successful was we were not consulted enough. But that is why I think the US has not imposed sanctions on MBS and kept that door open. And it realizes the importance of Saudi Arabia, because if you had actually imposed sanctions or taken a move, even more, they have already taken the Biden administration, by the way, has taken a very tough stance. But if they had gone further, I think then the relationship would have soured, and naturally Saudi Arabia is important in this context. So I think Saudi Arabia has also been dealt with in such a way that you have your channels of communication, and Saudi Arabia also realizes that I mean both sides realize their relevance for each other strategically. So if the if Biden actually has the political capital and he's able to build some sort of consensus, I don't think that the other players within the Middle East will really be able to sort of stop him from going ahead. And here I may also add another interesting thing. So last week we had discussed about how China has close relations with Iran and with the GCC countries, right?
Yeah,
So you may even have a situation where, because after all, China is also signatory. If you look at, it's basically P5+1, right? So
yeah,
China and Russia both are signatories, and even for China to have a meaningful relationship with Iran, economic relations, in spite of the 25-year agreement, obviously, if there are US sanctions, there are various hindrances to a proper relationship. So, in that sense, uh, because diplomacy is very strange. You could actually use even the Chinese leverage vis-a-vis both sides. I mean, vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, vis-a-vis Iran, to reach to find a middle path. So, and in fact, China and Russia, has, of course, now it's again because of posturing. They've been repeatedly reiterating that these sanctions should be removed. Sanctions have been imposed on Iran. They should be removed. That is out of because of the current tensions and all. But they've consistently been saying that. And there has been another interesting development. John Kerry, who was a former Secretary of State and also the US envoy for the Biden administration's envoy for climate change, and the Russian foreign minister, I think they had a brief meeting as well in Delhi. So I think we're seeing some interesting developments, and Iran is a perfect the Iran US relationship is a perfect illustration of the fact that there is no black and white in geopolitics, and there are numerous layers to it. Each stakeholder functions differently, according to the situation or
Yeah.
according to the issue. So, but I think on the whole, any sort of engagement is welcome, because, as I said earlier, also there is not that much time, and as I said, the political dynamics within Iran definitely people, the US and other Western countries don't want that the narrative gets hardened too much.
Yeah. So, well, talking about the indirect talks, I know it is a bit premature to talk about it, but do you think it is really possible for US and Iran to really come around, to really come to terms, given that Iran has kept the condition that the sanctions must be lifted first, and also given that it is under the influence of China, it has just signed the 25-year-old agreement. So, do you think it is really possible for US and China, or US and Iran to really come around?
So that is where I think this is. I feel that, I mean, obviously, some middle path will have to be found in any negotiation. You cannot not have such a maximalist position. But the US could also say that, okay, we're going to remove these sanctions. These are sanctions that hit you really hard. We step by step will begin to remove these sanctions. You sort of check the level of your uranium enrichment, so that it's in sync with what
Yeah.
the JCPOA, according to in compliance with the JCPOA. So there could be incremental steps in that direction, because obviously, I mean, the Iranian, for them, the economy is the main consideration. If you look at
Yeah.
issues like the rise in inflation, if you look at the depreciation of the currency, the contraction of their economy, so there are major challenges, and obviously, I mean, the pandemic has exacerbated them. So step by step, if certain sectors are identified, and certain areas where, for instance, that allow some of the countries, like for instance, US allies, to import Iranian oil and all. So you can find, I mean, there are some low hanging fruits, and you can
Yeah.
find a middle path.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining us, sir. So, all eyes on what happens next on the Iran nuclear deal, whether US and Iran actually come around and are able to revive the Iran nuclear deal. Keep watching us on One India English. We'll be back next week.